Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the cobblestone maze of 18th century Paris, where the air hangs thick with more than just revolutionary ideas and romantic intrigue. You're about to discover how the City of Light became so spectacularly filthy that desperate officials turned to an army of geese as their only salvation from urban decay. Picture yourself standing on the Pont Neuf in 1750, watching rivers of human waste cascade down stone gutters, while rats the size of house cats scurry between your feet, and the stench hits you like a physical wall. You probably won't survive 5 minutes without emptying your stomach. But somehow, 2 million Parisians called this nightmare home. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, comment your location and local time. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through the labyrinthine streets of pre-revolutionary Paris, where the very concept of sanitation exists only in the fevered dreams of a few progressive philosophers. The city sprawls before you like a medieval fever dream that somehow survived into the Age of Enlightenment. Its narrow passages squelching with a mixture that defies polite description. Animal dung, rotting vegetables, human excrement, and the occasional dead cat, all combining into what locals cheerfully call street soup. The Seine River, that romantic waterway of future postcards, flows past you, carrying cargo that would horrify modern environmental inspectors. Tanneries dump their chemical waste directly into the water, while butchers toss animal entrails from second-story windows with casual precision. You dodge a shower of pig intestines, while a baker across the street empties his chamber pot into the gutter with the nonchalance of someone watering plants. Paris in the 1750s housed nearly 2 million souls, crammed into a space roughly the size of modern Manhattan's financial district. Imagine trying to squeeze the entire population of Houston into downtown Boston, then removing all modern plumbing, garbage collection, and basic hygiene practices. The result would approximate what you're experiencing as you navigate these narrow passages, where buildings lean so close together that neighbors can literally shake hands across the street. The wealthy attempt to insulate themselves from this biological warfare by traveling in sedan chairs, carried by unfortunate servants, while the poor splash through puddles containing more bacteria than a medieval plague pit. You watch elegant nobles emerge from gilded carriages, pressing perfumed handkerchiefs to their noses, while their silk shoes squelch through muck that would challenge modern hazmat protocols. Street vendors somehow manage to hawk their wares in conditions that would shut down modern restaurants faster than you could say, "Health inspector." A fishmonger displays his catch on a wooden board, crawling with flies, while a bread seller nearby swats away rats with practiced efficiency. The irony isn't lost on you that this same city produced some of history's greatest philosophers and artists. Apparently, creativity flourishes even when ankle-deep in biological hazards. Contemporary foreign diplomats wrote home describing streets so putrid that their horses refused to walk through certain neighborhoods, while even the famously unhygienic English commented on Paris's spectacular commitment to urban decay. Venetian ambassadors compared the city unfavorably to medieval plague settlements, noting that the smell could be detected from several miles away, depending on wind conditions. The municipal authorities seemed paralyzed by the sheer scope of the problem. Traditional street cleaning involved paying desperately poor citizens to shovel the worst accumulations into carts, but these volunteers typically lasted about a week before succumbing to disease or despair. The city's attempts at organization resembled a comedy of errors written by someone with a particularly dark sense of humor. As night falls around you, the sounds shift from daytime chaos to something more sinister. You hear the scurrying of countless rats, distant howls of feral dogs, and the occasional splash as someone empties another chamber pot into the street below. The darkness mercifully hides some visual horrors, but your other senses remain under constant assault from this urban wasteland that somehow functioned as the beating heart of European civilization. King Louis XV himself reportedly complained that his capital smelled worse than his hunting dogs after a 3-day chase through swampland, while Madame de Pompadour refused to travel through certain districts without multiple layers of perfumed scarves. The royal court received increasingly desperate reports from city officials who seemed to compete for the most creative descriptions of urban decay. You find yourself in the cramped office of Jacques-Henri Béraud, Paris's newly appointed Inspector of Public Sanitation, a position that sounds impressive until you realize it essentially means chief complaint receiver for everything disgusting. The year is 1752, and scattered across his desk lie citizen petitions, royal decrees, and increasingly desperate proposals from entrepreneurs claiming they can solve Paris's waste crisis for the bargain price of bankrupting the royal treasury. That's when Madame Dubois arrives with the most absurd solution anyone has ever proposed: an army of geese. You watch this middle-aged widow, whose late husband apparently kept the cleanest farmyard in Normandy, explain her theory with the confidence of someone who has clearly never doubted herself. Geese, she insists, are nature's perfect garbage disposals, capable of consuming virtually anything organic while requiring minimal supervision and no wages whatsoever. Béraud listens with the expression of a man who has already heard proposals involving trained pigs, imported vultures, and something called revolutionary dung beetles. But Madame Dubois presents her case with scientific precision that would impress scholars at the Sorbonne. Geese possess powerful digestive systems capable of processing rotted vegetables, bread scraps, and even small bones. They naturally flock together, making them easier to manage than individual animals. Most importantly, they're aggressive enough to drive away rats, while being large enough to intimidate most street criminals. The economics sound almost too good to be true. A single goose costs roughly what the city pays one human street cleaner for 3 days of work. But the goose will theoretically labor for years, while requiring only basic shelter and occasional veterinary attention. You can practically see Béraud calculating potential savings as Madame Dubois continues her pitch, describing how her late husband's geese kept their property so immaculate that neighbors regularly accused them of employing invisible servants. The pilot program begins with 50 geese imported from Normandy, each selected for what Madame Dubois calls urban temperament and waste consumption efficiency. You follow the first flock as they waddle through Paris's gates like feathered conquistadors preparing to claim new territory. The birds seem remarkably unfazed by urban chaos, honking with what sounds suspiciously like enthusiasm as they encounter their first pile of rotting market refuse. Within hours, the geese demonstrate abilities that border on supernatural. They systematically devour everything organic in their path, while showing almost human understanding of property boundaries, somehow knowing exactly which piles of waste belong to public streets versus private courtyards. Local residents gather to watch this unprecedented spectacle, some laughing at the absurdity, while others cross themselves and mutter about divine intervention, taking increasingly strange forms. The success appears immediate and undeniable. Streets that haven't been truly clean in living memory suddenly sparkle like something from fairy tales, while the geese patrol their assigned territories with military precision. You observe them working in coordinated groups, some birds acting as lookouts, while others focus on consumption, displaying tactical awareness that would impress seasoned generals. Word spreads through the city faster than gossip about royal mistresses. Within weeks, other neighborhoods petition for their own goose squadrons, while enterprising citizens begin breeding programs aimed at producing the perfect urban cleaning goose. The birds become minor celebrities, with children naming their favorites and street vendors selling goose treats to citizens wanting to reward their feathered municipal employees. But you notice subtle signs that this honeymoon period might be temporary. The geese grow larger and more confident daily, their honking becoming more demanding than grateful. They've begun claiming choice roosting spots on church steps and in market squares, showing little concern for human convenience. Some birds display territorial behaviors, suggesting they consider certain streets personal property rather than public spaces they're hired to clean. Historians still argue whether Madame Dubois genuinely believed in her goose solution or simply recognized a desperate government official when she saw one, but her timing was impeccable. The Royal Treasury, initially thrilled by cost savings, authorizes expansion to cover all major Paris neighborhoods. Madame Dubois finds herself promoted to Chief Goose Coordinator, a title that involves managing hundreds of semi-wild birds scattered across one of Europe's largest cities. She hires assistants and establishes what amounts to Paris's first animal management bureaucracy, complete with record-keeping systems tracking individual goose performance metrics. Each bird receives a small brass collar bearing a number, transforming them from anonymous farm animals into numbered civil servants with specific duties and performance expectations. The royal court begins receiving glowing reports about dramatic improvements in urban cleanliness, with visiting dignitaries expressing amazement at Paris's innovative approach to municipal management. Foreign ambassadors write home describing the surreal spectacle of watching trained geese march through city streets like feathered soldiers on cleaning duty. You're standing outside the Café Procope in the early morning light, watching something that would have seemed impossible just months ago. A crowd of well-dressed Parisians gathered specifically to observe geese at work. The birds have transcended their humble origins as municipal employees to become genuine urban celebrities, each with devoted followers who track their daily routines with the obsession typically reserved for court mistresses or famous actors. Madame Beaumont, a silk merchant's wife, maintains what she calls her goose diary, recording the behavioral patterns of a particularly industrious bird. She's nicknamed Henri after the king. She explains to anyone willing to listen how Henri prefers morning cleaning sessions, shows remarkable intelligence in avoiding puddles, and has apparently developed a friendship with the neighborhood baker who saves him choice bread scraps. The phenomenon has spawned an entire subculture that transforms mundane street cleaning into public entertainment. Wealthy ladies organize goose viewing parties, complete with picnic baskets and folding chairs, positioning themselves at strategic locations to observe their favorite birds' daily performances. These gatherings have become social events where marriages are arranged, business deals are struck, and the latest court gossip is exchanged, while geese methodically consume urban waste. Street artists capitalize on this obsession by selling sketches of notable geese, while enterprising writers publish pamphlets detailing the personalities of famous birds. You encounter a young man selling what he claims are authentic goose feathers from celebrated cleaning crews, though you suspect most come from ordinary farm birds with no municipal credentials whatsoever. The social hierarchy that emerges around goose appreciation reflects broader Parisian class structures in fascinating ways. Aristocrats claim ownership of the most effective birds, insisting that certain geese work exclusively in districts where nobility resides. Middle-class citizens form clubs dedicated to specific flocks, while working-class residents develop gambling systems based on predicting daily goose productivity. Children have integrated the geese into their play with remarkable creativity, inventing games that involve following particular birds, imitating their honking patterns, and constructing elaborate theories about goose social dynamics. Some youngsters earn pocket money by serving as goose guides for tourists, leading visitors to prime viewing locations and providing commentary on bird behavior that ranges from surprisingly accurate observation to complete fabrication. The birds themselves seem to enjoy the attention, displaying behaviors that suggest they understand their celebrity status. Some geese appear to perform for audiences, engaging in what can only be described as showing off when crowds gather. Others have learned to recognize regular spectators and adjust their routines accordingly, almost as if they're conscious of their public image. This celebrity culture creates unexpected economic opportunities that extend far beyond simple waste removal. Tavern owners discover that positioning themselves near popular goose territories dramatically increases business, as spectators require refreshments during extended birdwatching sessions. Bakeries begin producing specialty items marketed as goose-approved, while textile merchants sell fabric patterns inspired by bird behavior. The phenomenon reaches absurd heights when fashion trends begin incorporating goose-related elements. Wealthy women commission jewelry featuring miniature brass collars similar to those worn by the cleaning birds, while men's clothing adopts subtle feather motifs that supposedly demonstrate solidarity with their municipal employees. But beneath this lighthearted obsession, you detect growing tensions that suggest the relationship between humans and geese is becoming more complex than anyone anticipated. Some citizens express resentment about the attention lavished on birds, while human workers struggle with poverty and unemployment. Others worry that the geese are becoming too comfortable with their celebrity status, displaying increasingly bold behavior that tests the boundaries of acceptable municipal employee conduct. Historians still debate whether this goose celebrity culture represented genuine affection for the birds or simply provided Parisians with harmless entertainment during a politically turbulent period. But contemporary accounts suggest the phenomenon served important social functions. The shared experience of goose watching created community bonds across class lines, while providing common topics of conversation that avoided dangerous political subjects. The bird's celebrity status also generates scientific interest from natural philosophers who begin studying goose intelligence and social behavior in urban environments. Their observations contribute to emerging theories about animal cognition, while raising uncomfortable questions about the ethics of employing non-human workers in municipal roles. As evening approaches and you watch the day's final goose performance wind down, the gathered crowd disperses with the satisfaction of people who have witnessed something genuinely entertaining. But their conversations reveal growing awareness that their beloved feathered celebrities are becoming something more complex than simple cleaning tools. They're evolving into a permanent part of Parisian urban life, with their own agenda and ambitions. You're kneeling in the candlelit shadows of Notre Dame Cathedral as Father Guillaume delivers what can only be described as the most unusual sermon in the church's 800-year history. His voice echoes through the Gothic arches as he denounces the unholy alliance between Christian souls and pagan beasts, declaring that Paris's goose program represents nothing less than a satanic corruption of divine order that threatens the very foundations of Catholic civilization. The clergy's opposition emerged gradually, beginning with minor complaints about geese disrupting religious processions and escalating into full theological warfare when the birds began roosting on church property. Father Guillaume represents the hardline faction that views the entire program as evidence of humanity's dangerous departure from God's natural hierarchy, while more moderate priests argue that using animals for beneficial purposes aligns with Christian stewardship principles. You witness the surreal spectacle of religious authorities conducting formal ceremonies to purify areas where geese have worked, complete with holy water sprinklings and Latin incantations designed to cleanse whatever spiritual contamination the birds might have introduced. Some parishes refuse communion to citizens who participate in goose-watching activities, while others organize prayer sessions specifically requesting divine intervention to end the avian abomination. The Protestant minority, always eager to distinguish themselves from Catholic positions, embraces an entirely different theological perspective. Their leaders argue that God grants intelligence to all creatures, and that denying animals the right to productive labor actually contradicts biblical teachings about universal service to divine will. You attend clandestine Protestant gatherings where ministers preach that the geese represent God's provision for urban challenges, comparing them to ravens that fed Elijah in the wilderness. This religious schism creates unexpected political complications as Catholic and Protestant neighborhoods develop radically different relationships with their cleaning birds. Catholic districts experience constant tension between religious authorities, condemning the geese and citizens who appreciate cleaner streets, while Protestant areas celebrate their birds as manifestations of divine providence and practical wisdom. The theological debate attracts attention from Enlightenment philosophers who see the goose controversy as perfect ammunition for their attacks on religious superstition. Voltaire himself allegedly writes a satirical essay comparing the Church's goose persecution to historical witch trials, though the piece circulates only in private salons due to censorship concerns. Other intellectuals use the controversy to explore questions about animal consciousness, natural rights, and the relationship between human authority and divine will. The situation becomes genuinely dangerous when radical Catholic groups begin organizing holy resistance against the geese, conducting nighttime raids to capture and kill birds they consider demonic agents. You witness the aftermath of these attacks: scattered feathers, broken brass collars, and increasingly aggressive surviving geese who seem to understand they're under assault from certain segments of the human population. Protestant communities respond by forming protective societies dedicated to defending their cleaning birds from religious persecution. These groups patrol their neighborhoods carrying clubs and iron tools, leading to violent confrontations that have nothing to do with street sanitation and everything to do with centuries-old religious hatred, finding a new expression through waterfowl politics. The royal government finds itself caught between competing religious factions, each demanding official support for their theological position on municipal geese. King Louis XV, who generally avoids religious controversy whenever possible, issues carefully worded proclamations that somehow manage to offend everyone involved while resolving nothing. Meanwhile, the geese themselves display behaviors that fuel both sides of the religious debate. Some birds seem to deliberately avoid church property, supporting Catholic claims about their unholy nature, while others appear drawn to religious buildings, lending credence to Protestant arguments about their divine mission. Several documented incidents involve geese interrupting religious services by wandering into churches during Mass, creating chaos that strengthens extremist positions on both sides. The controversy spawns an underground literature of religious pamphlets, theological treatises, and satirical poems that use geese as symbols for broader conflicts between tradition and innovation, faith and reason, clerical authority and practical necessity. These writings circulate through coffee houses and private salons, contributing to the intellectual ferment that would eventually fuel revolutionary sentiment. Historians still argue whether the religious opposition to Paris's goose program reflected genuine theological concerns or provided convenient cover for broader resistance to governmental innovation. But the conflict demonstrates how even seemingly practical municipal policies could become entangled with the era's deepest cultural and spiritual divisions. As you leave Notre Dame and step back into streets where geese continue their work despite religious condemnation, you realize that these birds have become unwitting symbols in battles that extend far beyond urban sanitation. They represent competing visions of humanity's relationship with nature, divine authority, and the proper limits of governmental power. Questions that would soon explode into revolution. You're crouched behind a marble fountain in the courtyard of the Hôtel de Soubise, watching what amounts to the strangest military operation in French history unfold. The Duchess de Polignac has just deployed a squadron of specially trained attack geese against her social rival, the Countess de Brion, in a territorial dispute that began over contested cleaning rights, but has escalated into full-scale aristocratic warfare using weaponized waterfowl. The transformation of municipal cleaning geese into instruments of noble vengeance represents perhaps the most bizarre corruption of Paris's sanitation program. What began as practical waste management has evolved into a shadow economy where wealthy families breed, train, and deploy birds for purposes that have nothing to do with street cleaning and everything to do with settling scores that stretch back generations. You observe the Duchess's geese executing coordinated attacks on the Countess's garden party with military precision that would impress veteran generals. The birds have been trained to target specific individuals, apparently able to distinguish between friendly and enemy humans based on clothing colors, jewelry, or other identifying markers. They swoop down on the Countess's guests with terrifying accuracy, creating chaos that sends silk-clad nobles fleeing in directions their dignity would normally forbid. The underground goose warfare industry operates through networks of specialized trainers, breeding specialists, and what can only be described as avian mercenaries, who rent their services to nobles seeking creative revenge against personal enemies. These professionals command prices that exceed what many families earn in entire years, while their birds undergo training regimens that rival military academies in complexity and ruthlessness. Madame de Maintenon, unofficial coordinator of noble goose operations, maintains detailed records of feuds, alliances, and planned attacks that read like military intelligence reports. Her establishment in the Faubourg Saint-Germain functions as both training facility and strategic headquarters, where aristocrats plan campaigns that use geese as living weapons in social warfare that ordinary citizens can barely comprehend. The birds themselves have been bred for aggression and intelligence far beyond their municipal counterparts. These combat geese display territorial instincts and tactical awareness that borders on frightening, capable of coordinating complex attacks, distinguishing between targets and bystanders, and retreating when facing superior forces. Some specimens reportedly understand hand signals and voice commands with accuracy that suggests near-human intelligence. The economic implications extend far beyond simple revenge services. A thriving black market has emerged around goose-related espionage, with trained birds used to infiltrate rival households, steal documents, and gather intelligence on business dealings or romantic entanglements. These avian spies command premium prices, while their handlers develop increasingly sophisticated techniques for directing their activities. You witness a clandestine transaction in the shadows of Saint-Sulpice Church, where the Duc de Richelieu purchases what the seller calls intelligence geese, trained to recognize specific individuals and follow them through the city while remaining undetected. The birds wear modified collars equipped with tiny bells that alert handlers when targets are located, creating surveillance networks that would challenge modern security agencies. The violence escalates when rival noble families begin conducting what amount to aerial cavalry charges, using formations of attack geese. These battles destroy property, terrorize innocent citizens, and occasionally result in serious injuries when birds trained for aggression encounter humans unprepared for combat with weaponized waterfowl. Street vendors capitalize on the chaos by selling protective gear, reinforced hats, padded clothing, and walking sticks designed specifically for defending against hostile geese. Some entrepreneurs establish goose-free zones where citizens can conduct business without fear of becoming collateral damage in aristocratic bird warfare. The royal government struggles to regulate this underground economy without acknowledging its existence, leading to bizarre legal situations where nobles are prosecuted for disturbing the peace with domestic fowl, while everyone understands they're actually being charged with conducting private military operations using living weapons. Historians still debate whether noble goose warfare represented genuine military innovation or simply provided aristocrats with expensive entertainment during a period of political boredom. But the phenomenon demonstrates how quickly practical technologies can be corrupted for purposes their inventors never imagined. The situation becomes genuinely dangerous when competing noble factions begin importing exotic birds, swans, pelicans, and even small flamingos in an arms race that threatens to transform Paris into a battleground between increasingly bizarre flying creatures. The city's skies fill with conflicts that have nothing to do with cleaning and everything to do with status, revenge, and the peculiar ways that wealth and boredom combine to create spectacular absurdity. As night falls, and you watch the aftermath of the day's aerial conflicts, scattered feathers, overturned carriages, and traumatized servants, you realize that Paris's goose experiment has spawned something far more complex and dangerous than anyone anticipated. These birds have become symbols of power, instruments of warfare, and commodities in an economy based entirely on the creative application of controlled violence. You're pressed against a shuttered bakery window as angry voices rise from the street below, watching what historians would later call the Great Goose Rebellion of 1756 unfold with all the drama of a miniature revolution. Pierre Rousseau, an unemployed street cleaner whose job was eliminated by the municipal bird program, stands atop an overturned cart, delivering what can only be described as the world's first anti-waterfowl manifesto to a crowd of increasingly agitated citizens. The rebellion emerged from months of accumulated grievances that transformed Paris's relationship with its feathered employees from grudging acceptance to outright warfare. Human workers who lost their livelihoods to geese joined forces with citizens terrorized by increasingly aggressive birds. Religious zealots convinced the fowl were demonic agents, and shopkeepers whose businesses suffered from constant avian disruption. Rousseau's speech captures the fury of people who feel displaced by creatures they consider intellectually inferior. "Brothers and sisters," he shouts, his voice cracking with emotion, "we've allowed ourselves to be replaced by animals who don't even understand what they've stolen from us." His words resonate with desperate families who watched their breadwinners lose employment to birds that work without wages, benefits, or basic human dignity. The crowd's anger has been building for weeks as the geese grew bolder and more territorial. Citizens report birds blocking access to public fountains, claiming ownership of market stalls, and showing aggressive behavior toward anyone who challenges their perceived authority. Children can no longer play safely in streets that have become battlegrounds between territorial fowl and frustrated humans. You witness the rebellion's first act of organized resistance as the crowd moves toward the Place de Grève, armed with nets, clubs, and improvised weapons designed specifically for capturing hostile waterfowl. Their plan involves systematic removal of geese from key neighborhoods, followed by demands that city officials abandon the entire program and return to human-based street cleaning. The violence begins when a group of particularly aggressive geese near the Hôtel de Ville interprets the approaching crowd as an invasion of their territory. The birds attack with coordinated ferocity that catches the rebels off guard, using tactics that suggest they've learned from months of urban warfare with noble families. Wings, beaks, and claws create chaos that sends humans fleeing in directions their dignity would normally forbid. But the rebels adapt quickly, employing strategies that demonstrate human intelligence can still overcome avian aggression when properly organized. They use nets to separate individual birds from their flocks, wooden shields to protect against aerial attacks, and coordinated movements that prevent the geese from using their superior mobility advantage. The battle spreads throughout central Paris as news of the rebellion draws supporters from neighborhoods across the city. You follow groups of citizens conducting systematic goose-clearing operations, moving from street to street in formations that mirror military units engaged in urban warfare. Their success breeds confidence that transforms individual frustration into collective action. The sight of humans defeating their former animal employees emboldens previously hesitant citizens to join the rebellion. Shopkeepers emerge from their establishments, carrying brooms and iron tools, while domestic servants abandon their duties to participate in what many view as a battle for human dignity against avian tyranny. The geese respond with tactical adjustments that suggest they understand this conflict represents an existential threat to their urban dominance. Birds from across the city begin converging on contested areas, creating massive flocks that attack human positions with terrifying coordination. Their brass collars catch sunlight like military decorations as they execute maneuvers that would impress professional armies. The rebels develop increasingly sophisticated anti-goose technologies, including specialized traps, decoy food sources designed to separate birds from their flocks, and communication systems that coordinate attacks across multiple neighborhoods simultaneously. Some participants display creativity that borders on genius, inventing solutions to problems that military theorists had never considered. Government forces find themselves caught between competing loyalties as the rebellion escalates. City officials who championed the Goose program face growing pressure from citizens demanding its termination, while royal authorities worry that anti-animal violence could spread to other municipal innovations, or worse, evolve into broader challenges to governmental authority. The conflict reaches peak intensity when rebel forces surround the former monastery that serves as goose training headquarters, trapping hundreds of birds and their human coordinators in what amounts to a medieval siege conducted with 18th century weapons against opponents that evolution never prepared for such warfare. Historians still argue whether the Great Goose Rebellion represented genuine popular uprising or simply provided outlet for broader social tensions seeking expression through relatively safe targets. But the event demonstrates how quickly practical policies can trigger violent resistance when they disrupt established social relationships. As darkness falls and you watch exhausted rebels celebrating their temporary victories, while surviving geese regroup in shadowy corners, you realize that Paris's experiment with animal labor has crossed a threshold from which there might be no peaceful return. The city has become a battlefield where humans and birds fight for control of urban space, with consequences that extend far beyond simple street cleaning. You're standing in the morning mist outside the offices of the newly established London Sanitation Company, watching English engineers unload their revolutionary street cleaning equipment, while the last generation of Parisian cleaning geese huddles in makeshift shelters, their brass collars tarnished and their purpose suddenly obsolete. The year is 1761, and modernity has arrived in the form of mechanical sweepers, organized human crews, and systematic waste collection that makes waterfowl employees as outdated as medieval siege engines. The transformation began when King Louis XV, exhausted by years of goose-related controversies, authorized a complete overhaul of municipal sanitation based on innovations emerging from London's recent urban reforms. English consultants arrived with blueprints for sewage systems, standardized garbage collection, and human workforce management that promised to clean Paris without the political, religious, and social complications that had turned simple street maintenance into urban warfare. Thomas Morrison, the lead English consultant, surveys the city with the confidence of someone who has never doubted that human intelligence can solve problems that others tried to address with animal labor. His crew brings technologies that represent genuine advancement, wheeled collection carts, systematic scheduling, and most importantly, employment programs that put displaced French workers back on municipal payrolls at wages that restore their dignity. You follow Morrison through districts where geese still patrol their territories, apparently unaware that their services are no longer required. The birds continue their routines with mechanical precision, but their efforts seem almost pathetic when compared to the efficiency of organized human teams working with proper equipment. What once appeared miraculous now looks primitive and unsustainable. The economic calculation that originally justified the Goose program has been completely overturned by innovations that reduce costs while improving results. Modern street cleaning employs more people at better wages while achieving cleanliness standards that even the most efficient geese could never match. The birds' brief reign as municipal employees represents a historical curiosity rather than a sustainable solution. But dismantling the Goose program proves more complex than anyone anticipated. The birds have established territorial claims, breeding populations, and behavioral patterns that assume permanent urban residence. They resist relocation efforts with intelligence and determination that suggests they consider Paris their rightful home, rather than a temporary workplace. Citizens who developed emotional attachments to specific geese organize resistance movements aimed at preserving what they consider living monuments to municipal innovation. These goose preservation societies argue that the birds represent important cultural heritage that deserves protection even if their practical utility has ended. The process of collecting and relocating hundreds of semi-wild geese creates logistical challenges that would perplex modern animal control experts. Some birds have learned to recognize capture equipment and avoid human contact, while others display aggressive behavior that makes safe handling nearly impossible. Their brass collars, once symbols of municipal employment, become obstacles that complicate efforts to return them to agricultural life. Madame Dubois, now approaching 70 and facing the collapse of everything she built, supervises the program's dissolution with dignity that masks obvious heartbreak. Her detailed records of individual bird performance, breeding lineages, and behavioral observations represent the only systematic study of urban animal labor in European history. Documents that will fascinate future scholars while serving no practical purpose. The fate of individual geese varies dramatically based on their adaptability and the persistence of their human advocates. Some birds successfully transition back to farm life, while others remain in Paris as feral populations that gradually lose their distinctive behaviors and breeding. A few become permanent residents of wealthy households whose owners cannot bear to see their former municipal employees abandoned. Historians still debate whether Paris's goose experiment represented genuine innovation or elaborate folly, but most agree that it demonstrated both human creativity in addressing urban challenges and the limitations of solutions that ignore broader social, political, and economic contexts. The program succeeded technically while failing politically, creating more problems than it solved, despite achieving its original objectives. The brass collars become collector's items that wealthy Parisians display as conversation pieces, while street vendors sell authentic goose feathers from the municipal cleaning program to tourists seeking souvenirs from history's strangest urban experiment. These artifacts represent the only permanent legacy of a decade when waterfowl served as civil servants in Europe's most sophisticated city. Morrison's team completes their modernization project with efficiency that makes the preceding decade seem like an elaborate dream. Streets achieve cleanliness standards that surpass anything accomplished during the Goose era, while human workers receive wages, benefits, and dignity that the bird program could never provide. As you watch the final transport carts loaded with confused geese departing Paris for unknown rural destinations, you realize you're witnessing the end of an era that will never be repeated. The city has chosen modernity over novelty, practical solutions over experimental ones, and human dignity over cost savings, achieved through animal labor. You're walking through the pre-dawn silence of Paris in the winter of 1763, your footsteps echoing on cobblestones that gleam with cleanliness achieved by human hands rather than avian dedication. The city sleeps peacefully, its streets maintained by Morrison's efficient crews, while somewhere in the distance, a single, lonely honk drifts across the rooftops. The call of the last wild goose that refuses to abandon the urban territory it once helped to clean. The final chapter of Paris's extraordinary experiment with municipal waterfowl unfolds not with dramatic battles or official ceremonies, but with the quiet persistence of a few birds that somehow evaded the relocation efforts and adapted to life as urban refugees. These survivors represent living memories of a decade when the impossible became routine, when innovation trumped convention, and when the boundaries between human and animal labor dissolved into something unprecedented in European history. Old-timers still point out corners where their favorite geese used to work, sharing stories with grandchildren who listen with the polite skepticism reserved for tales that sound too strange to be true. Madame Beaumont, now a widow, maintains her goose diary despite having no birds to observe, filling pages with memories of Henri and his companions, while newer residents wonder about her obsession with creatures they've never seen. The brass collars have become precious relics that appear occasionally in estate sales or antique markets, each one representing an individual bird that once served the city with dedication that bordered on heroic. Collectors pay extraordinary prices for these artifacts, displaying them in private cabinets alongside medals from forgotten wars and coins from vanished kingdoms. Father Guillaume, older now and somewhat mellowed by time, occasionally mentions the goose years in sermons that blend historical accuracy with theological interpretation. His stories transform the birds into symbols of humanity's perpetual struggle between innovation and tradition, progress and faith, practical necessity and spiritual wisdom. Younger priests listen with expressions that suggest they are not entirely certain whether these tales represent literal history or elaborate metaphor. The Protestant communities that once celebrated their cleaning geese as divine providence now focus their energy on other causes, though their meeting houses still display small paintings depicting the birds as symbols of God's provision during difficult times. These artworks will survive long after living memory of the actual program fades, becoming mysteries that future historians will struggle to interpret accurately. Scholars who study the period find themselves grappling with documentation that seems almost too extraordinary to be credible. The carefully maintained records, eyewitness accounts, and official government correspondence all confirm that Paris genuinely employed hundreds of geese as municipal workers. Yet the very thoroughness of the evidence makes the story seem like elaborate historical fiction. The last verified sighting of a municipal goose occurs on a foggy morning in 1764, when a night watchman reports observing a brass-collared bird methodically cleaning refuse from the steps of Saint Eustache Church. Whether this represents a survivor from the original program or simply an escaped farm animal wearing a replica collar becomes the subject of debate that continues for decades among citizens who remember the extraordinary period when such questions mattered. Morrison's sanitation system continues to function with mechanical efficiency that makes the goose era seem like a distant dream. Streets remain cleaner than they had been in centuries. Human workers receive fair wages, and the complex social, religious, and political problems created by animal labor have dissolved into historical curiosity rather than contemporary concern. Yet something indefinable has been lost in the transition to modernity. A sense of absurd wonder, perhaps. A flicker of connection between creature and city, between the feathered rhythm of nature and the engineered logic of human systems. You pause at the edge of a quiet square, where, long ago, geese once waddled in formation, scraping grime from the gutters with comic dignity. Now, only the rustle of street cleaner bristles and the faint buzz of gas lamps remain. A warm gust rattles an old shutter. Somewhere, a bakery begins its morning preparations, the scent of yeast and browning crust slipping into the air. You breathe it in and listen, not for honks, but for echoes. Because if you're quiet enough, if the city's silence leans just so, you might almost hear them. The low murmurs of 1,000 webbed feet, working in synchronized absurdity, reshaping the destiny of a city, one sweep at a time. So, as we close tonight's strange little chapter in urban history, ease your shoulders back into the softness around you. The geese are gone, but their imprint lingers in dusty journals, in wistful glances from old windows, and in the occasional dream that smells faintly of pond water and pipe smoke. Let the candles of 18th century Paris flicker out behind your eyes. Let cobbled alleys give way to quiet breath. Maybe tomorrow, you'll remember this only faintly. A bedtime tale whispered by a city that once believed in miracles wearing brass collars. For now, let yourself drift. You're safe. The streets are clean. And the geese? They've earned their rest.